Stellenbosch, known for its picturesque landscapes, thriving vineyards, and rich history, is nestled in the heart of South Africa's wine country. Tourists and students alike flock to this town for its charm, renowned university, and relatively peaceful atmosphere. However, like much of South Africa, Stellenbosch also carries the weight of a darker reality, the presence of crime that lurks beneath the surface. Despite its outward appearance of safety, the town is not immune to the social and economic inequalities that plague much of the country. It is against this backdrop that the tragic story of Hannah, a bright young student, and her close friend Jaylen begins to unfold. Hannah was a 21-year-old social sciences student at Stellenbosch University. Described by her friends and family as compassionate and deeply empathetic, she often went out of her way to help others, particularly those less fortunate. Her family came from a position of relative wealth, but Hannah never flaunted this. She was modest and simple, known for always putting the needs of others before her own. In fact, when her parents offered to buy her a new car, she politely declined, opting instead to keep her old, reliable blue Volkswagen Golf. To her, life wasn't about material possessions but rather about making a difference in the lives of others. Hannah's life at university was fulfilling. She thrived academically and was well loved by her peers. It was at one of the many social gatherings that took place in Stellenbosch's student community that she met Jaylen. A fellow student, Jaylen quickly became one of her closest friends. Like Hannah, Jaylen had a generous spirit. He admired her kindness, and they often spent time together discussing their shared dreams of helping those in need. Their bond grew stronger over time, and they became almost inseparable, supporting one another in both their studies and personal lives. On the night of May 26, 2017, Hannah and Jaylen were out enjoying the company of their friends at a local bar. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and good company. It was a typical night out for university students looking to unwind after a week of lectures and assignments. As the night began to wind down, Hannah and Jaylen decided it was time to head back to their dorms. Although it was late, Stellenbosch felt familiar to them, a place they considered safe despite the occasional warnings about crime in the area. Jaylen, ever the protective friend, offered to walk Hannah back to her dorm to ensure she got home safely. However, Hannah, always thinking of others, insisted that she drive Jaylen home instead. "It's too late for you to walk," she said, concerned for his safety as much as he was for hers. Together, they got into her old Volkswagen Golf and made their way to Jaylen's apartment complex. The streets were quiet, and there was no indication that the night would take a deadly turn. As they pulled up to Jaylen's apartment complex, their relaxed conversation was abruptly interrupted. Out of nowhere, four men emerged from the shadows, their faces menacing. They were armed with screwdrivers and immediately surrounded the car. In an instant, what had been an ordinary night turned into a terrifying ordeal. These men were no strangers to crime. Known in the area for their violent activities, Good Boy, Gerando Pan, Aben van Nicker, and LVW Julius were seasoned criminals. They had long histories of robbery, assault, and drug use. Their presence that night was not a matter of chance. They were out on the hunt for victims, and unfortunately, Hannah and Jaylen had crossed their path. The four men forced their way into the car, taking control of the situation with a chilling efficiency. They shoved Jaylen into the trunk of the car and kept Hannah in the passenger seat. Panic washed over both of them as they realized the severity of the situation. There was no escape. The men held screwdrivers to their throats, making it clear that any attempt to resist would be met with violence. As the car sped away, they drove aimlessly around Stellenbosch, searching for opportunities to further their crime spree. In the hours that followed, Hannah and Jaylen endured unimaginable fear and uncertainty. Their captors made several stops, including at a local ATM, where they attempted to withdraw money using Jaylen's bank card. In an attempt to outwit the criminals, Jaylen provided them with a fake PIN code, hoping it would buy them time or cause confusion. However, this decision only infuriated the men. Enraged by their inability to access the funds, the robbers became more aggressive and began discussing what to do with their captives. For Jaylen, the situation grew more desperate by the minute. Trapped in the trunk of the car, he could hear the men discussing their next move, and he feared the worst for both himself and Hannah. Though he couldn't see what was happening, the sound of their angry voices and the tension in the air were palpable. He could only imagine the terror Hannah was experiencing in the front seat, completely at the mercy of their captors. The robbers' next move was cold and calculated. Deciding that Jaylen was of no further use to them, they drove to a remote area outside of town. There, they dragged him from the trunk, beat him severely, and left him for dead in a desolate field. Despite the brutality of the attack, Jaylen clung to life. His survival instincts kicked in as he mustered the strength to crawl toward a nearby house, hoping to find help before it was too late. Meanwhile, Hannah's fate took a far more tragic turn. Left alone with her captors, she faced the unimaginable, a night of physical and psychological torment at the hands of 4 ruthless criminals. As Jaylen fought for his life in the desolate field, bruised and bloodied from the savage beating, Hannah remained trapped in the car with her captors. What followed was a series of events that were as horrifying as they were senseless. The 4 men, driven by a dangerous mix of desperation and cruelty, subjected Hannah to unimaginable suffering. The robbers, high on adrenaline and drugs, had lost all sense of humanity. After abandoning Jaylen, they turned their full attention to Hannah. In the isolated darkness of the Stellenbosch countryside, far from any potential help, she was completely at their mercy. They threatened her, demanded money, and mocked her pleas for her life. What started as a robbery had now escalated into something far worse, and the situation spiraled into a night of sexual violence and unimaginable terror. Hannah, a compassionate and caring individual who had spent her life helping others, now found herself in a nightmare that she had no control over. Her captors showed no signs of remorse or restraint. They violated her, stripping her of her dignity and leaving her broken, both physically and emotionally. The attack was brutal and methodical, as the men acted without a shred of empathy, only caring about their own twisted desires. At some point during the horrifying ordeal, the men decided that they could not let Hannah live. They knew that if they allowed her to go free, she could identify them to the police. Their solution was as brutal as it was final: they would kill her. Hannah's murder was carried out with disturbing cruelty. One of the men, Jaylen, took a screwdriver and plunged it into her neck repeatedly, inflicting deep and fatal wounds. But the violence did not stop there. After stabbing her, the men found a large rock, weighing an estimated 38 kilograms, 84 pounds, and used it to crush her skull. The sheer weight of the rock and the force with which it was wielded ensured that Hannah would not survive. In the dark, remote field, her life was snuffed out in the most violent of ways. As the 4 men left her body in the field, they continued their crime spree. Their appetite for destruction had not been sated. After killing Hannah, they drove through the night, looking for their next victims. In the early hours of the morning, they targeted 2 other women, kidnapping and robbing them in a similarly violent manner. Stellenbosch, typically peaceful in the dead of night, had become a hunting ground for these predators, and the community would soon be reeling from the horror they left in their wake. Meanwhile, Jaylen's ordeal had not ended. Left for dead in the cold, isolated field, he somehow found the strength to survive. Drenched in blood and barely conscious, Jaylen managed to crawl towards a distant light coming from a nearby farmhouse. The distance felt impossibly long, every step excruciatingly painful, but survival was his only thought. With his head pounding and vision blurred, he dragged himself through the dirt, driven by sheer willpower. When he finally reached the farmhouse, he banged weakly on the door, praying that someone inside would hear his desperate pleas for help. By some miracle, the homeowners did hear him. When they opened the door, they were horrified at the sight of the young man covered in blood and barely clinging to life. Jaylen collapsed at their doorstep, but his first words were not about his own pain or survival. "Help Hannah," he gasped, his mind still focused on his friend, unaware that she had already been brutally murdered. The homeowners immediately called for medical assistance and alerted the police. Jaylen was rushed to the hospital, where he was treated for his injuries, while the police launched a manhunt for the attackers. Thanks to Jaylen's bravery and the quick actions of the homeowners, police were able to gather enough information to track down the criminals. Later that same day, officers located Hannah's Volkswagen Golf and began pursuing the men. The criminals, realizing they were being chased, attempted to flee, leading the police on a tense, high-speed chase through the streets of Stellenbosch. For nearly half an hour, the police chased the robbers as they weaved through traffic and ignored red lights in a desperate bid to escape. However, the police were relentless, determined to catch the men responsible for such horrific acts. Eventually, the robbers' reckless driving led to their downfall. They lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a ditch, bringing the chase to a sudden and violent end. The police quickly surrounded the car and arrested all 4 men. It was a moment of relief for the officers, but the horrors of the night were far from over. Inside the car, they found evidence linking the men to Hannah's murder, Jaylen's assault, and the other crimes they had committed that night. The weight of their crimes became clear, and the community of Stellenbosch would soon learn the full extent of the tragedy. The trial of Good Boy, Jaylen Pan, Abin van Nicker, and LVW Julius quickly became a high-profile case in South Africa. The brutality of the crime and the senseless loss of life had shocked the nation. The courtroom was filled with tension as the families of both Hannah and Jaylen attended, seeking justice for their loved ones. Hannah's parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter, sat through the trial, forced to listen to the horrific details of the night she was taken from them. Jaylen, still recovering from his physical and emotional scars, also testified, recounting the nightmare he had endured in his near-death experience. Despite overwhelming evidence against them, the 4 men showed no remorse during the trial. They laughed and joked with each other in the courtroom, even mocking the proceedings. Their behavior only deepened the pain for the families and the community, who were struggling to make sense of the senseless violence. At one point, Abin van Nicker wrote a letter asking for forgiveness, but his words rang hollow in the face of his actions, and it was clear that there was no true remorse. Ultimately, justice was served. Good Boy, Jaylen Pan, and Abin van Nicker were all sentenced to life in prison for the kidnapping, robbery, sexual assault, and murder of Hannah. LVW Julius, who had played a slightly lesser role in the crimes, was sentenced to 22 years in prison for his involvement in the robbery and kidnapping. The sentencing brought a sense of closure for some, but for Hannah's family and friends, no amount of justice could ever bring her back. The conclusion of the trial brought a sense of legal closure to the case, but the emotional scars left on the families, friends, and community were deep and enduring. The brutal nature of Hannah's murder and Jaylen's near-death experience had shaken Stellenbosch and the wider South African public to their core. For many, it was a stark reminder of the precarious balance between beauty and danger that permeated South African society, particularly in cities like Stellenbosch, where privilege and poverty coexist uneasily. Hannah's family, devastated by the senseless loss of their daughter, struggled to come to terms with her death. She had been a light in their lives, a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, full of compassion and promise. Her parents, in their grief, spoke publicly about the injustice of losing their child to such mindless violence. It was a grief that no parent should have to endure, compounded by the horrific details of the crime. Hannah's father, in particular, became a vocal advocate for changes in how South Africa dealt with violent crime. He called for stronger policing, better social safety nets, and more attention to the root causes of crime that allowed such heinous acts to occur. In the aftermath of her murder, Hannah's family found some solace in action. Rather than allowing her legacy to be defined by the violence of her death, they sought to honor her life through a charitable foundation established in her name. The Hannah Cornelius Foundation, as it was called, aimed to support disadvantaged children and young people in South Africa, particularly those at risk of falling into cycles of crime and poverty. It was a cause that aligned with Hannah's own passions, helping others, especially those in need, to build better futures. The foundation focused on providing educational resources, mentorship, and social support to children from underprivileged backgrounds. It was their hope that by investing in the next generation, they could help prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. The foundation also worked to raise awareness about gender-based violence, a pervasive issue in South Africa, in hopes of creating a society where young women like Hannah could walk the streets without fear. Hannah's parents poured their grief into this work, determined to make something meaningful out of their tragedy. They partnered with schools, community organizations, and other charities to expand their outreach, turning their loss into a mission of hope. The foundation became a beacon for those who wanted to combat the growing tide of violence in South Africa, offering a glimpse of what was possible when communities came together for the common good. For Jaylen, surviving the attack was both a blessing and a burden. Physically, he recovered from the severe injuries he sustained, but the emotional trauma remained long after the bruises faded. The guilt of surviving when Hannah had not weighed heavily on him. He had accompanied her that night to keep her safe, but in the end, he felt powerless to prevent the tragedy. Survivor's guilt gnawed at him, leaving him struggling with depression and anxiety in the months following the attack. Jaylen received counseling and support from friends and family, but the emotional scars were slow to heal. Despite his deep pain, he became a symbol of resilience in the community. His survival and his testimony were crucial in ensuring justice for Hannah, and for that, many looked to him with admiration. However, the road to recovery was long and fraught with difficulty. Jaylen withdrew from university for a time, unable to concentrate on his studies as he processed the trauma. In time, with the support of his loved ones, Jaylen began to rebuild his life. He channeled his pain into advocacy, working alongside Hannah's family to raise awareness about gender-based violence and the dangers faced by students in South Africa. He spoke at events, sharing his story and urging others to take action to make South Africa a safer place. His voice became part of a growing movement demanding accountability and reform in the justice system, as well as more robust support for victims of violent crime. Jaylen's recovery was a testament to human resilience, but it also highlighted the need for continued support for survivors of violence. His work alongside the Hannah Cornelius Foundation allowed him to find purpose amidst the pain, and in doing so, he honored his friend's memory. Hannah's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern of violence in South Africa. The country has long struggled with high rates of violent crime, often driven by deep-seated economic inequality, unemployment, and social unrest. In Stellenbosch, a town known for its wealth and affluence, the attack exposed the underlying tensions between the privileged student community and the marginalized individuals living on the fringes of society. For many, the case became a flashpoint for discussions about safety, crime prevention, and the role of the police in protecting citizens. The public outcry following Hannah's death was significant. Many demanded stricter laws and better law enforcement to address the rising tide of violence in South Africa. The case drew national and international attention, leading to widespread media coverage and protests. Student groups at Stellenbosch University organized vigils and marches, calling for justice not only for Hannah but for all victims of gender-based violence in the country. In the wake of the trial, the government faced mounting pressure to address the root causes of crime, particularly in communities where poverty, unemployment, and drug addiction were rampant. Social commentators pointed to the need for comprehensive reforms, from improving access to education and healthcare to creating more job opportunities for young people in vulnerable communities. The government's response was slow, but the attention generated by cases like Hannah's made it clear that change was necessary. Despite the horror of her final moments, Hannah Cornelius's life continues to have a lasting impact. Through the foundation established in her name, disadvantaged children receive support, and young people in South Africa are given the tools they need to create better futures. The story of Hannah's kindness and her dedication to helping others has inspired many to take action in their own communities, and her legacy has become one of hope, resilience, and compassion. The documentary detailing the events of that tragic night in 2017 serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of community solidarity in the face of violence. While Stellenbosch, like much of South Africa, continues to grapple with the challenges of crime and inequality, the memory of Hannah Cornelius lives on through the positive change her family and friends have made in her name. Though the pain of her loss will never fade for those who knew and loved her, the work done in her memory ensures that her spirit of kindness and compassion will continue to make a difference in the lives of others for years to come.